She was just a nurse, a rookie, they called her. They laughed when she applied for the elite combat recovery ward. Then a 4-star general arrived, a critically wounded soldier in his care, and everything changed. The file they couldn't open, the skills she kept hidden, the corrupt doctor who ruled the floor. It was all about to detonate. Now, let me take you inside the sterile, silent halls of St. Jude's Medical Center, where the quietest person in the room was about to become the most dangerous. The laughter was not loud. It was worse. It was a low, shared smirk, a currency of condescension traded between the tenured nurses at the central station. Alara Vance felt it more than she heard it, a prickle of heat on the back of her neck as she pinned her application to the ward's bulletin board. The notice was for a permanent position on the newly opened Combat Recovery Ward, a state-of-the-art wing funded by a joint venture between the hospital and the Department of Defense. It was the crown jewel of St. Jude's, and applying for it as a nurse with only 6 months on the floor was apparently hilarious. "Ambitious," Linda, the charge nurse, had commented, her voice dripping with a saccharine poison. She tapped a long, blood-red fingernail on Alara's name. "You barely have your sea legs in general med-surg, dear." Alara had simply nodded, her expression placid. "I meet the qualifications listed." "The paper qualifications," another nurse, Mark, had snorted, not bothering to look up from his charting. "This isn't about changing bedpans for 80-year-olds with pneumonia. These are complex trauma cases, soldiers, men." The unspoken words hung in the air like antiseptic fumes. "You're too quiet, too small, too new. You don't belong." Alara Vance had learned long ago that the most effective camouflage was silence. In the bustling, ego-driven ecosystem of a major hospital, her quiet competence was misinterpreted as timidity. Her preference for observing before acting was seen as hesitation. She was 5'6", with a lean build that disappeared inside her baggy blue scrubs. Her hair was pulled back in a severe functional bun, and her face, often devoid of makeup, was forgettable in its stillness. She was a ghost in the hallways, a pair of efficient hands, a name on a schedule. That was exactly how she wanted it. She finished her shift, the ghost of those smirks following her to the locker room. She changed out of her scrubs, the institutional fabric smelling faintly of bleach and sorrow, and into a pair of worn jeans and a gray t-shirt. The transformation was unremarkable. She was still invisible, but as she shrugged on her backpack, her fingers brushed against a network of fine, silvery scars that traced a map of forgotten violence across her right shoulder blade. They were hidden under the gray cotton, just as everything else was. The Combat Recovery Ward was Dr. Alistair Finch's kingdom. He was the chief of surgical trauma, a man whose charisma was as sharp and sterile as his scalpels. He had silver hair, a smile that could charm donations out of billionaires, and a reputation burnished to a blinding sheen. He walked the halls like a visiting deity, his entourage of residents and interns trailing behind him like disciples. Finch had personally interviewed every nurse for his prestigious ward. He cultivated a specific image, elite, untouchable, perfect. The nurses he hired were reflections of that image, sharp, confident, and fiercely loyal to him. They were a clique, a phalanx of perfectly pressed scrubs and condescending smiles. Alara's application was a joke to them, but a procedural necessity. Finch had to review it. He called her into his office 2 days later. The room was a monument to his ego. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls covered in framed awards and photos of him shaking hands with senators. The air smelled of expensive cologne and power. He didn't ask her to sit. He held her application between 2 fingers as if it were a contaminated specimen. "Nurse Vance," he began, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "I'll be brief. Your resume is adequate for a general floor, but this ward is another level. We are dealing with the nation's heroes. The pressure is immense. The medical challenges are profound." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Alara remained perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Her heart rate was a steady 62 beats per minute. She was calmer in this room than she had been in years. "Frankly," Finch continued, leaning back in his chair, "I don't see it. You lack the requisite presence, the assertiveness. My team operates at a level of intuitive, aggressive care that I don't believe you are capable of." It was a dismissal dressed up as a professional assessment. He was telling her she was weak, unfit. He smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth. It was a predator's smile, not a doctor's. "I appreciate your interest, of course, but we'll be moving forward with other candidates." "I see," Alara said. Her voice was even, betraying nothing. "Thank you for your time, doctor." She turned to leave. "One more thing," he said, a strange note in his voice. He was tapping her file on his desk. "Human Resources flagged your personnel file. It's sealed. Military service, it says. Requires a level 4 security clearance to open. That's unusual for a nurse." Alara's shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. She kept her back to him. "It was a clerical error during my discharge. They sealed the wrong file. It's just basic field medic training." It was a lie, thin and brittle, but the only one she had. Finch chuckled. "A clerical error that requires a general's sign-off to undo? I'm sure. Well, no matter. It's irrelevant." He tossed her application into the trash bin beside his desk. "You're dismissed, nurse." Alara walked out, her face a mask of calm. But inside, a cold dread was blooming. The sealed file was her history, her nightmare, the life she had run from. She had been assured it would remain buried, a ghost in the government's vast machine. That Finch, a civilian doctor, had even seen the flag on it was a breach of protocol she couldn't comprehend. It meant someone, somewhere, had made a mistake, and mistakes like that could get people killed. She went back to her duties on the general med-surg floor. The whispers followed her. "Finch shot her down," she heard Mark say by the coffee machine. "Told you, she doesn't have the stomach for it." She ignored them. She cleaned wounds, administered medications, and held the hands of the dying. She did her job with a quiet, relentless efficiency that made the other nurses uncomfortable. She never wasted a movement. She never missed a subtle change in a patient's vitals. Her charts were immaculate, her assessments unnervingly precise. She was a better nurse than any of them, and they hated her for it. They couldn't understand how someone so timid could be so good. A week passed. The new combat recovery ward opened with a champagne reception for hospital donors. Dr. Finch was on the cover of a local magazine, hailed as a patriot and a pioneer. Alara saw the magazine in the break room, his smiling face a glossy lie. She also saw other things, small things, a shipment of top-shelf Hexacleanse antiseptic wash disappearing from the central supply, replaced by a generic brand known to cause skin irritation. A new batch of intravenous catheters that felt flimsy, the plastic thinner than the usual brand. She noticed a pattern. The premium supplies, the ones specifically requisitioned for the new ward, were often the ones that went missing, swapped out for cheaper, inferior alternatives. She mentioned it once to Linda. "Have you noticed the new catheters are kinking more easily?" Linda had waved a dismissive hand. "Supply chain issues. Everyone's cutting corners since the pandemic. Just be more careful." But Alara knew the feel of quality gear. She knew the difference between something designed to save a life under pressure and something designed to save a budget. This was not a supply chain issue. This was deliberate. It was theft. It was dangerous. She kept her head down. She charted the malfunctions. A note here, a timestamp there. A quiet, meticulous collection of data that no one else was bothering to record. It was not her place to be a hero. Not anymore. She was here for the quiet, for the anonymity, to pay a penance for a past that was supposed to stay buried. Then the helicopter came. It wasn't a hospital life flight. It was a Sikorsky HH-60 Pavehawk, a dark green beast of a machine that settled on the hospital's rooftop helipad with a deafening roar that vibrated through the building's concrete skeleton. It was a sound from her old life, a sound of dust and blood and desperate speed. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She was in the middle of a routine medication pass when the overhead speakers crackled to life, not with a standard code, but with the clipped, authoritative voice of the hospital administrator. "All non-essential personnel clear the West Wing corridor. Dr. Finch to the roof, stat. This is a designated military priority arrival. Repeat, military priority." The floor erupted in chaos. Nurses and orderlies scrambled. Alara simply stood still, the small paper cup of pills in her hand trembling slightly. Not here, she thought. It can't follow me here. From her position, she could see through the large windows at the end of the hall. She saw the gurney being rushed from the elevator, surrounded by a cordon of men in dark suits and another two in army dress uniforms. Dr. Finch was at the front, his face a mask of self-importance and feigned urgency. On the gurney was a figure swathed in blankets and hooked to a portable monitor, his body a landscape of bandages and tubes. Walking beside the gurney, his posture ramrod straight, was a man who radiated an aura of absolute command that made even Finch look like a nervous intern. He was tall and lean, in his late 50s, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform adorned with 4 stars on each shoulder. His face was granite, etched with lines of deep responsibility, and his eyes, cold and gray as a winter sky, missed nothing. They swept the hallway, cataloging every detail, every person, with a practiced, lethal assessment. Alara knew that look. She knew that posture. She knew the weight of the stars on his shoulders. She had served under men like him. This was General Marcus Thorne. She had seen his face in intelligence briefings. He was the commander of Joint Special Operations Command, a living legend, a man who answered only to the Secretary of Defense and the President. And he was here, in her hospital, his face a grim testament to the gravity of the man on that gurney. She shrank back into the alcove of a patient's room, her body acting on pure instinct. Hide, observe, do not be seen. The procession swept past, a whirlwind of controlled panic and authority. They were heading for the combat recovery ward. Of course, Finch's kingdom, the perfect stage for his particular brand of medical theater. The patient was Sergeant First Class Michael Thorne, the general's only son. The whispers spread through the hospital like a virus, an IED in Syria. A classified operation gone wrong. He had been stabilized at Landstuhl in Germany and flown directly here to the best new facility in the country, under the direct care of the celebrated Dr. Finch. The pressure on the ward was immense. The general took up a silent, imposing vigil in the family waiting room, his mere presence turning the entire floor into a high-security zone. His 2 aides, stone-faced men in crisp uniforms, stood guard outside the patient's room. Alara tried to focus on her own patients, an elderly woman with congestive heart failure, a man recovering from gallbladder surgery, the mundane, predictable rhythms of civilian medicine, but she could feel the thrum of tension from the West Wing. She could hear the elevated, anxious chatter of Finch's nurses. 2 days later, she was floated. Due to the high-profile patient, the hospital had mandated a 2-to-1 nurse-to-patient ratio on the combat recovery ward, and they were short-staffed. Linda delivered the news with undisguised relish. "They need an extra pair of hands over in the snake pit," she said, handing Alara the assignment slip. "Don't screw it up." Alara's blood ran cold. She had no choice. Refusing a float assignment was grounds for immediate dismissal. She took the slip, her hand steady, her face a blank canvas. Walking onto the combat recovery ward was like stepping into another world. The lights were softer, the equipment newer, the air charged with a humming, nervous energy. Finch's hand-picked nurses moved with a brittle, theatrical efficiency. They were all on display for the general. Alara was assigned to the patient in the room directly opposite Sergeant Thorne's, a Marine recovering from a complex leg amputation. She received the report, her mind automatically segmenting the information, prioritizing tasks, building a mental flowchart of the next 12 hours. The other nurses ignored her, a silent, coordinated snub. She was the outsider, the reject, the temporary help. It didn't matter. She wasn't there for them. She was there for the patient. From her vantage point, she could see into Sergeant Thorne's room whenever the door opened. She saw the constant flurry of activity. She saw Dr. Finch, always present, always performing. He would explain a procedure in loud, confident tones, clearly intended for the general, who often stood in the corner of the room, a silent granite statue of grief and command. And Alara saw the little things. She saw a nurse fumbling to spike an IV bag, using one of the cheap, flimsy catheters that kept kinking. She saw a resident misread a telemetry strip, only to be corrected with a loud, humiliating rebuke from Finch. She saw a dressing on the sergeant's primary blast wound that was already showing signs of saturation, but no one seemed to be addressing it. The ward was a stage, but the play was a disaster. It was all performance, no substance. Finch's team was good at looking good. They were not good at managing a patient on the ragged edge of survival. Sergeant Thorne was not a patient. He was a prop for their prestige. Late that night, the alarms started. A frantic, piercing beep from Sergeant Thorne's room. Sepsis. His blood pressure was cratering, his temperature was spiking. A post-operative infection, raging and uncontrolled. The room flooded with staff. Alara watched from her doorway as Finch took center stage, barking orders. Push a liter of saline, start a leave-a-fed drip, get me a central line kit now. General Thorne stood against the far wall, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. He was a man used to being in control of life and death situations, now forced to be a helpless spectator. Alara's own patient was stable. She watched the chaos across the hall, her mind a cold, analytical engine. They were chasing the symptoms, not the source. The infection was aggressive. Why? Contamination, a breakdown in sterile procedure, or faulty equipment. That saturated dressing, the cheap antiseptic, the shoddy catheters. It was a cascade of a dozen small failures, all originating from Finch's corrupt cost-cutting. Finch was trying to insert a central line into the sergeant's subclavian vein. His hands, usually so steady for the cameras, were trembling slightly. He missed the vein on the first pass. He cursed under his breath. The patient's pressure dropped another 10 points. "He's crashing," one of the nurses yelled. "I know that," Finch snapped, his voice cracking. The facade was crumbling. Underneath the celebrity surgeon was a man in over his head. Alara saw it. The moment of fatal hesitation. Finch was preparing for a second attempt, but his angle was wrong. He was aiming too high. He was going to puncture the lung. A pneumothorax on top of septic shock would kill him. She moved. She didn't think. She reacted. Years of training, buried under a mountain of trauma and regret, took over. She crossed the hall in 3 quick strides, her voice cutting through the panic with surgical precision. "Stop!" The entire room froze. All eyes turned to her. The quiet nurse, the floater. Finch glared at her, his face a mask of fury. "Who the hell do you think you are? Get out of my room!" "You're going to cause a tension pneumothorax," Alara said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She pointed to the ultrasound screen. "The vein has collapsed. You're blind. You need femoral access, and you need to decompress his abdomen. He's got compartment syndrome from the fluid resuscitation. That's your source." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a stunning, audacious diagnosis, delivered with the certainty of a prophet. "That's insane," Finch sputtered. "Get security. Remove this nurse." But General Thorne had moved from the wall. His eyes, which had been filled with a father's fear, were now sharp, analytical. He wasn't looking at Finch. He was looking at Alara, at her stance, the economy of her movement, the way she held her ground in a vortex of chaos. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of his best operators in the middle of a firefight. "Let her speak," the general said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an iron command. The room fell silent. Alara ignored Finch completely, her focus entirely on the dying man on the bed. She spoke to the general as if they were the only 2 people there. "Sir, his abdomen is rigid. His urine output is 0. The pressure from the sepsis and the aggressive fluid replacement is crushing his internal organs, cutting off blood flow. It's killing him faster than the infection. We decompress the abdomen, we restore blood flow, and we buy time for the antibiotics to work. There's a needle decompression kit in every field trauma pack." Finch was apoplectic. "This is a hospital, not a MASH unit. Her license will be revoked for even suggesting such a barbaric procedure." "Have you done it before?" the general asked Alara, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, sir," she said simply. The sergeant's monitor shrieked a long, continuous tone, a systole, flatline. "He's gone!" a resident cried out. "Start compressions!" Finch yelled, panicked and useless. But Alara was already in motion. She grabbed a large bore needle from a nearby cart, the kind used for deep injections. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. She vaulted onto the bed, straddling the patient, her movements fluid and certain. "Charge the paddles," she commanded, and to her own surprise, a nurse scrambled to obey. She palpated the sergeant's abdomen, her fingers finding the precise anatomical landmark just below the xiphoid process. It was a move born of muscle memory, of doing the same thing by the light of a headlamp in the back of a bucking helicopter. She plunged the needle deep into the abdominal cavity. There was a sickening hiss of air and a gush of serosanguinous fluid. The effect was instantaneous. The rigid abdomen softened. On the monitor, a single weak electrical spike appeared. A heartbeat, then another. Rhythm restored, she said, her voice still calm. She pulled the needle out and immediately started chest compressions, her form perfect, her timing relentless. Push one of epi and get me a real trocar kit. The room was stunned into a new kind of silence, the silence of awe. They were no longer watching a rogue nurse. They were watching a master at work. She was not just competent, she was magnificent. Dr. Finch stood by, utterly neutered, his authority evaporated. He could only stare, his face a mixture of disbelief and raw hatred. General Thorne's eyes were locked on Alara's hands. He saw the efficiency, the lack of hesitation. But he saw something else. As she worked, she secured a new IV line in the patient's arm. The tape she used to secure it, she tore and folded the ends into small, triangular tabs, dog ears. A small, seemingly insignificant detail, but it was not insignificant to him. It was a field technique taught to Special Forces medics, pararescue jumpers, and other elite operators. It allowed for quick removal of the tape with gloved or bloody hands in a combat environment. It was a signature, a quiet, professional calling card. It was the signal. The sergeant was stabilized. His blood pressure was rising. His heartbeat was steady. Alara, assisted by the now obedient staff, had inserted a proper abdominal drain and was titrating his medications with an unnerving precision. She had saved his life. She finally stepped back from the bed, her job done. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a cold, hollow space in its wake. She looked up and saw the entire room staring at her. The nurses who had mocked her, the doctor who had fired her, and the general who had just witnessed a miracle. The reality of what she had done crashed down on her. She had broken a dozen protocols. She had defied the chief of surgery. She had exposed herself. Her career was over. She turned to walk away, expecting to be met by security guards. Instead, she was met by General Thorne. He stood directly in her path, blocking her exit. "I don't know who you are," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but you just saved my son's life. You will not be leaving this room." He turned his head slightly, his eyes still on Alara, but his words were for Finch. "Doctor, you are relieved of duty on this case, effective immediately. You will not come within 50 feet of my son. Is that understood?" Finch's face went from white to purple. "General, this is a flagrant breach of hospital protocol. This nurse is a reckless, insubordinate—" "Is that understood?" Thorne repeated, his voice dropping a full octave. It was the sound of command that had sent thousands of men into battle. It tolerated no argument. Finch deflated, his bluster turning to ash in his mouth. He nodded sullenly. "Understood." He shot Alara a look of pure venom before stalking out of the room, his disciples trailing awkwardly behind him. The room was quiet again. General Thorne turned his full attention back to Alara. The other nurses, not knowing what to do, began to quietly tidy up, giving them a wide berth. "Walk with me, nurse," the general said. It was not a request. He led her out of the room and down the now empty hallway to a small private consultation room. He closed the door behind them, sealing them in silence. The room was sterile and impersonal, a beige box with 2 chairs and a table. He did not sit. He stood facing her, his expression unreadable. "I was a young lieutenant in Panama," he began, his voice quiet, conversational. "Got my leg torn open by shrapnel. I was bleeding out in a ditch. The medic who saved me, he was just a kid. But he moved like you. No fear, no hesitation. He packed the wound, started a line, and secured it with dog-eared tape, just like you did." Alara said nothing. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. "That's not a technique they teach in nursing school," the general continued, his eyes boring into hers. "That's something they teach at the Special Warfare Medical Group at Fort Bragg, or to the PJs at Kirtland. So I'm going to ask you again. Who are you?" The secret she had guarded for 5 years, the identity she had shed like a snakeskin, was unraveling. There was no point in lying anymore, not to this man. "My name is Alara Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was a staff sergeant in the Air Force." "And?" he prompted. She took a deep breath. "My call sign was Valkyrie. I was a pararescue jumper, 24th Special Tactics Squadron." The general's expression did not change, but she saw a flicker of profound understanding in his eyes. The 24th STS was the Tier 1 Special Operations Unit of the Air Force, the elite of the elite. They were the operators sent into the most dangerous places on Earth to rescue other operators. To be a PJ in that unit was to be a legend. Valkyrie, he said, the name a soft echo of respect. I remember the reports. The rescue in the Hindu Kush. 3 Rangers pinned down, 1 critical. You roped in alone under heavy fire. That was a long time ago, sir, she said, looking down at the floor. The memory was a raw wound. The blood, the screams, the man she couldn't save, the one that broke her. The file HR has, he stated. It's sealed by my authority, by JSOC. All records of operators from certain units are automatically classified upon separation. It's for their protection. It was not a clerical error. Finch saw the flag on it, she said, the cold dread returning. The general's jaw tightened. He shouldn't have. That's a security breach I intend to investigate personally. But right now, I have a more immediate problem. My son is alive because of you, and I believe his life is still in danger, not from the enemy, but from this hospital. He paused, his gaze intense. You saw it too, didn't you? In that room, the chaos, the incompetence. Alara nodded slowly. It was more than that, sir. It's the supplies, the equipment. It's substandard. The primary dressing on your son was a cheap cellulose pad, not the silver-impregnated type required for a blast wound. The IV catheters are brittle. The antiseptic is a low-grade generic. Someone is stealing the top-tier medical supplies and replacing them with knockoffs. The general's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. Finch. He controls the inventory for this ward, Alara confirmed. He signs off on every order. General Thorne began to pace the small room, his energy a caged thunderstorm. I've had my suspicions. Over the past 6 months, we've sent 5 other soldiers to this ward. 2 of them developed severe post-operative infections that couldn't be explained. Good soldiers. Their careers are over. I thought it was just bad luck. But this is deliberate. This is corruption. He stopped and faced her. Finch is a powerful man. He's a pillar of the community. The hospital board protects him. Accusations without irrefutable proof will be dismissed. He'll paint you as a disgruntled, hysterical nurse. He'll destroy you. I know, she said. She had already accepted it. But he doesn't know who you are, the general said, a dangerous glint in his eye. He thinks you're a rookie nurse. He has no idea he just picked a fight with a PJ from the 24th. He looked at her, not as a nurse, but as a fellow warrior. I need your help, Sergeant Vance. You're on the inside. You know the systems, the people, the routines. I have the authority, the resources, but I need eyes and ears on the ground. I need a weapon on the inside. This was the moment, the crossroads. She could refuse. She could walk away, try to disappear again, find another quiet corner of the world to hide in. Or she could step back into the life she had fled, not with a gun, but with a stethoscope. Not on a battlefield of sand and rock, but one of linoleum and bleached white sheets. If you were Alara, would you accept the general's offer and step back into the fight, or would you protect your hard-won peace and walk away? She thought of the general's son, his life hanging by a thread. She thought of the other soldiers who had suffered. She thought of Finch's arrogant, dismissive smile as he threw her life's work in the trash. The quiet had never been peace. It had been a cage of her own paranoia. She looked General Thorne in the eye. Her posture straightened, the quiet nurse receding, replaced by the ghost of the operator she once was. What are your orders, sir? A slow, grim smile touched the general's lips. Welcome back to the fight, Valkyrie. The plan was simple in its design, but terrifying in its execution. They had to catch Finch in the act. They needed proof of the supply swap, and they needed to link it directly to him. The general's aides, 2 quiet, efficient men named Captain Evans and Lieutenant Marks, set up a discreet command post in the hotel suite across from the hospital. Alara became their inside asset. Her official status was a thing of administrative beauty. General Thorne had pulled strings she couldn't even imagine. A single phone call to the hospital's CEO had resulted in a stunning reversal. Alara Vance was not only cleared of all insubordination charges, she was promoted. She was named the general's official medical liaison and assigned as the primary nurse for Sergeant Thorne. She answered to no one but the general himself. The news sent a shockwave through the hospital staff. The nurses on the ward, who had once treated her with open contempt, now looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. Linda and Mark avoided her gaze in the hallways. She had become an untouchable, a woman with a four-star general as her personal guardian angel. Finch was forced to accept it, but his rage was palpable. He was barred from his own star patient, his authority on his own ward usurped by a rookie nurse. He watched Alara from a distance, his eyes cold and reptilian. He knew she was a threat, but he didn't yet understand the scale of it. Alara's new role gave her unprecedented access. She was a ghost with a purpose now. While tending to Sergeant Thorne, whose condition was steadily improving under her meticulous care, she observed. She documented. She used a micro camera, the size of a button on her scrubs, provided by the general's team. She recorded the serial numbers on the boxes of cheap supplies. She filmed the empty slots in the storeroom where the high-grade equipment should have been. She noted the delivery schedules, the inventory logs Finch personally signed, the way he would often stay late, long after his clinical duties were done, meeting with a pharmaceutical representative who always used the back service elevator. She became an expert in the hospital's underbelly. She learned the security guards' patrol routes, the blind spots in the CCTV coverage, the exact moment the night shift supervisor took his coffee break. The skills were dormant, not gone. Tradecraft, infiltration, surveillance. It was just another mission. One night, she followed the pharmaceutical rep after his late meeting with Finch. He was a portly man in a cheap suit, carrying a heavy-looking duffel bag. She trailed him down to the parking garage, staying in the shadows, her footsteps silent. She watched as he loaded the duffel bag into the trunk of a nondescript sedan and drove away. She memorized the license plate and relayed it to Captain Evans. An hour later, the report came back. The car was registered to a shell corporation that had received 6 large, unexplained payments over the last year from an offshore account. An offshore account that Evans's team, with the help of military intelligence, was now working to link back to Dr. Alistair Finch. They were building the cage bar by bar. The most dangerous part was the bait. They needed to catch Finch swapping a specific high-value item. General Thorne arranged for a special shipment of a new experimental antibiotic, incredibly expensive and potent, to be delivered to the ward, designated for his son. The crate was delivered with great fanfare, a clear message to Finch of its value. The crate itself was a Trojan horse. The vials inside were real, but the crate was fitted with a silent, motion-activated GPS tracker and a microcamera. Alara's job was to ensure the crate was placed in the main medical storeroom, a room Finch had exclusive access to after hours. That night, the hospital was quiet. Alara sat by Sergeant Thorne's bedside, watching his vitals on the monitor. He was sleeping peacefully, his breathing deep and even. He was going to make a full recovery. She had ensured it. Her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. A text from Evans. He's on the move. Alara slipped out of the room. She moved down the darkened hallway, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. She positioned herself in a small utility closet with a louvered door, affording her a direct line of sight to the storeroom. The air smelled of stale mop water and disinfectant. Minutes later, she saw him. Dr. Finch, moving furtively, looking over his shoulder. He used his keycard to access the storeroom and disappeared inside. Alara held her breath. The next 10 minutes stretched into an eternity. Her heart was a slow, heavy drum in her chest. This was the most vulnerable part of any operation, the moment of action, when everything could go wrong. The storeroom door opened again. Finch emerged, carrying a medical cooler. He looked around one last time before heading for the service elevator at the far end of the hall. It was done. The bait was taken. On her phone, she could see the GPS tracker moving. It was heading down to the parking garage. A second tracker, placed by Evans on the rep's car days earlier, was also in the garage, waiting. A perfect intercept. The next morning, the hospital board convened an emergency meeting in the main conference room. The official reason was to discuss the miraculous recovery of Sergeant Thorne and to publicly thank the medical team. It was Finch's chance to reclaim the narrative, to take credit for the success that Alara had orchestrated. Alara was there, standing quietly in the back of the room. She was in her simple blue scrubs, an island of calm in a sea of expensive suits. Finch was at the podium, basking in the glow of the board members' admiration. He was eloquent, charming, and utterly fraudulent. And while there were some complications, my team's swift and decisive action, guided by years of experience, ensured a positive outcome, he was saying, his voice smooth and confident. It is a testament to the level of care we provide here at St. Jude's. He smiled, the picture of a benevolent medical genius. It was then that the conference room doors opened. General Marcus Thorne entered. He was not alone. He was flanked by Captain Evans, Lieutenant Marks, and two uniformed military police officers. The air in the room crackled, the temperature dropping 20 degrees. The board members stared, their jaws slack. Finch froze at the podium, his smile dissolving into a mask of confusion and alarm. "General Thorne," the hospital CEO said, standing up shakily, "this is an unexpected honor. We were just discussing your son's wonderful progress." "I'm not here to discuss my son's progress," the general said, his voice like cracking ice. "I'm here to discuss treason." A collective gasp went through the room. "Treason?" the CEO stammered. "Dr. Finch," the general said, his eyes locking onto the man at the podium, "for the last 6 months, you have been systematically stealing medical supplies paid for by the United States government and designated for the care of wounded soldiers. You have been replacing them with substandard and in some cases dangerous counterfeit materials and selling the authentic supplies on the black market for a profit." Finch's face was ashen. "This is an outrage, an unsubstantiated, libelous accusation. I'm a respected surgeon. You have no proof." "Oh, but we do," the general said calmly. He nodded to Captain Evans, who stepped forward and placed a small laptop on the conference table, connecting it to the room's large projector screen. The first image that appeared was a satellite map showing 2 GPS trackers meeting in the hospital parking garage the night before. The second was a photo, a crystal-clear image taken from the micro camera inside the crate of antibiotics. It showed Dr. Finch's face, illuminated by the storeroom lights, as he transferred the vials into his personal cooler. The third was a series of bank statements from an offshore account showing deposits that correlated perfectly with the dates of missing shipments. The final piece of evidence was a live video feed. It showed a team of military investigators in a warehouse across town, standing over an open duffel bag filled with stolen medical supplies. The pharmaceutical rep was in the background, already in handcuffs. The room was utterly silent. The evidence was absolute, irrefutable. Finch stood at the podium, trembling, his carefully constructed world shattered around him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His arrogance had been a shield, and now it was gone, leaving only a pathetic, guilty man. "Dr. Alistair Finch," General Thorne said, his voice ringing with the cold finality of a death sentence. "You are under arrest for theft of government property, fraud, and multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice as it applies to civilian contractors. Your actions endangered the lives of United States service members. You left my son to die. You will be tried in a federal court." He nodded to the MPS. They moved forward, their movements crisp and efficient. They flanked Finch, their presence an undeniable statement of his new reality. "You can't do this to me," Finch shrieked, his voice finally returning, high and panicked. "I'm the chief of surgery. I built this ward." One of the MPs took his arm. "Sir, you need to come with us." They led him away, a broken, blubbering man, his fall from grace as swift and brutal as it was complete. The doors closed behind them, leaving a stunned, silent room in their wake. General Thorne surveyed the pale, horrified faces of the hospital board. "This hospital will be placed under a full Department of Defense audit. Anyone found to be complicit in Dr. Finch's activities will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." He then turned, his gaze sweeping the room until it found Alara, still standing silently in the back. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not just a general, but a grateful father. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. A nod of thanks, a nod of victory, a nod of profound respect. In that moment, every smirk, every whispered insult, every condescending dismissal she had ever endured was rendered meaningless. It was all just noise. 2 weeks later, the hospital was still reeling. The audit was in full swing, and 2 administrators had been forced to resign. The combat recovery ward was under new management. Alara stood by the window in Sergeant Thorne's room. He was sitting up in a chair, dressed in his own clothes, ready to be discharged. The general was beside him, a hand on his son's shoulder. "I don't know how to thank you," the younger Thorne said to Alara, his voice still a little weak but sincere. "My father told me what you did. You saved my life." I was just doing my job, Sergeant, Alara said softly. The general walked her out into the hall. Finch has already taken a plea deal. He'll be in prison for a very long time, he said. His entire network is being dismantled. You did more than just save my son, Alara. You saved countless others who would have been his victims. They stopped at the now bustling nurses' station. The new staff, a mix of military and civilian nurses, worked with a quiet, focused energy. The atmosphere of fear and ego was gone, replaced by one of professional dedication. What will you do now? The general asked. I don't know, she admitted. Go back to the general floor, I suppose. Find the quiet again. The general shook his head. That's not going to happen. I've been authorized to create a new position, a permanent one, a civilian military liaison for all DoD medical partnerships east of the Mississippi. The job is to oversee standards of care, to audit supply chains, to act as an advocate for our wounded warriors, to make sure what happened here never happens anywhere else. He paused, his expression serious. The position requires someone with a unique blend of skills, someone who understands both the civilian medical world and the uncompromising standards of military special operations, someone who can't be intimidated, who sees things others miss. It requires a quiet professional. He looked at her expectantly. The job is yours if you want it. You'll answer directly to me. Alara looked around the ward. She saw the faces of the soldiers, the quiet courage in their eyes. She saw the nurses working, dedicated and unburdened by corruption. This was a place of healing now, a place of integrity, a place she had helped to build. She was not a rookie nurse. She was not a ghost. She was Valkyrie. She had found a new battlefield, a new way to fulfill the pararescue motto, that others may live. She looked back at the general, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her lips. I accept, sir. She was no longer hiding. She was home. And if you've made it this far, I want to say thank you. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these stories to life. So please, take a moment to hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss what's coming next. And for my question of the day, have you ever had a moment where you had to reveal a hidden skill to solve a crisis? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. The next story is already loaded up on your screen. Just click that thumbnail and I'll see you there.